Hello everyone, and welcome to Untied We Stand. I'm Kevin Putzier, and I'd like to talk about a concept that makes a lot of sense, but is heavily resisted by both major parties in the U.S. That concept is universal basic income, which I believe is a vital part of the political discussion. This is where, as a right of citizenship, a citizen is given a piece of the profits of the nation. There are a number of strategies to get to that point, some of them complementary and some contradictory. However, the idea is a safety net which guarantees that while you can rise as high as you are able, you can only fall so far. Now, a UBI, which is the abbreviation for Universal Basic Income, has a lot of reasons to be something we're looking into, including the undeniable fact that our systems, both virtual and physical, are leading more and more to the eventual banishment of a great many labor jobs. Conservatives and the bootstrapping crowd will, rightly for once, point out that eventually those jobs will be replaced by other forms of employment as our societies become more complex. The key word here is eventually, and it leaves out a hell of a lot of stuff in between. When radical shifts in automation begin, they are not likely to be at an orderly pace, and we currently have no plans to make certain that the millions who will be displaced have a way to live. This is not in any way the only argument for a UBI, but it's one I'm going to focus on in this video because there's a step towards getting there that also solves this problem. That step is a guaranteed basic income. Now clearly, the name itself shows this to not be universal. This means it will favor those who do not make enough money to survive as it stands, or who become displaced. In the example I've cited, this would be because of technological advances making their skill set redundant. But it could just as easily be accident, business failure on the part of their employer, illness, natural disasters, or a medical condition. The point, then, is to have a safety net in place that allows a person to continue to have a decent life while recovering from misfortune. This is not the same as our current unemployment insurance, which is largely punitive and requires a great deal of jumping through largely pointless hoops. The current hodgepodge of ineffective safety nets will give me endless material going forward, so I'll leave it at that for the moment and focus instead on a guaranteed basic income. In this video, I'll only be talking about what it does and the basic mechanisms that would be in place, not its funding. That's a long subject in and of itself, and I will be going into that in detail as I go forward. This is a subject I have thought long and hard on and done a massive amount of research into. So before anyone accuses me of simply asserting that it can be worked, I'll plead guilty on that. Consider this an opening argument, not a detailed case. To start with, let's define this beast. A guaranteed basic income would be a right of citizens rather than an emergency measure. This is important because it changes how you qualify. In order for the idea to work, it has to be for a sufficient amount of time that you might restructure your life to go beyond it. Or in the case that you cannot, the recertification mustn't be too burdensome. Make no mistake, this would be designed specifically to replace most federal and state safety nets. It does not cover medical, which in civilized nations is already paid for by taxation. Yeah, I said it, and yes, by the measure spoken of among many other things, the United States fails to be a civilized nation. This is part of what I hope to address in this channel. But I digress. Onward. A guaranteed basic income, GBI from here forward, would kick in if you become unemployed or your employment was insufficient to live on. This would be based on a national average to include rent, food, and basic necessities. In my mind, this would include transportation costs. In my vision for this, once you've qualified, you receive this GBI for a period of 1 calendar year without recertification. Again, I'll not go into funding just yet, as that will get long. During that year, you get it, period. No further tests, no nothing. You get the check. Now this will lead to a number of positive societal effects, and very quickly. The first and most obvious one, since this is a right of citizenship, is all those currently homeless would be able to take advantage of it. This would pretty much end homelessness. Why? Because it would allow those displaced to get in somewhere. In my thinking, this would likely lead to a fair amount of migration, since often the centers of homelessness are also places that cost rather a lot. So this GBI would likely recommend to those people to move somewhere else. Because of the GBI, they'd be able to afford travel, secure temporary lodging, and get into something more permanent. What this does is to buy time. Time to get an education, time to get help with mental health, physical health, addictions, etc. Time, in short, to get a messed up life back on track. We are, by most measures, a very rich nation. You wouldn't know it if you're outside of the gated communities and Washington suburbs, though. Over 500,000 people are outdoors as you watch this because they have no choice. And it's January, folks. This would end that. Another near immediate effect would be a reduction in petty crime, and I suspect violent crime as well. Poverty-stricken areas have high crime due to desperation more often than ill intent. Les Miserables was not a fairy tale. It's the life of a lot of people. There's more. A GBI would end poverty in the United States. It would not make everyone rich, but it would make it so no one is desperately poor. Even those who are not homeless, but rather hanging on by a combination of grit, desperation, and predatory credit, would be immediately in a better position. This, for instance, would allow parents to spend more time with their children, prioritizing the family instead of enriching the already wealthy. This in itself would tend to give labor more power, as the corporations would need to prioritize labor to get it done. They would either innovate and automate, the earlier scenario, or they'd learn that paying a living wage is a good idea if you like to remain in business. Probably both. Because of the GBI, they would not be able to negotiate in bad faith and depend on the threat of starvation to bring labor back to their collective knees. Even given this, it would allow families to restructure things. Instead of working full-time, parents could work shorter hours. This prioritizes the next generation. It also would allow time for adults to live rather than merely existing. This can be extrapolated to a lot of things. Our society could become more cooperative as we would have time to start working with and learning to know our neighbors to build more inclusive societies. It would reduce tensions between the races, possibly enough to begin the long overdue reckoning with our checkered past, and it would set the stage for becoming an actually exemplary nation. Further, people with more leisure time have more incentive to take care of their bodies, which would reduce the public health care burden as an ancillary effect. So in conclusion, a GBI would step us toward an American society that could lower the temperature of our discourse, foster cooperation, break corporate monopolies, and benefit every single citizen, even the wealthy, as a citizenry that has enough is less likely to be violent. From there, we could move on to making it universal. But a GBI in itself would send the message to all Americans that you can rise as high as you're able, but you can only fall so far.